On the first day of the winter term, the principal of Northbridge International School made a strange announcement. "In 3 weeks," she said, "you will face a new kind of examination. It will not be a normal test or a quick classroom quiz. It will decide who represents our school at the Global Story Lab." Mira felt her stomach twist. She liked writing, but huge exams always made her nervous. After class, she went to consult her favourite teacher, Mr. Hale, the quiet literature tutor who always smelled of coffee and old paper. "Is this about grades?" she asked. "Or some secret university project?" "At the outset, it may look like an exam," Mr. Hale said, "but it is really a journey. You will have to show that you can read deeply, think clearly, and speak so that others truly understand you." He gave her a folder. On the front, under the heading Story Lab Challenge, was a short outline. 1. Enter the Library of Living Texts. 2. Solve the trial of reading. 3. Survive the trial of thinking. 4. Give a final presentation to the Council of Ideas. At the end, Mr. Hale added, "You must represent our school with one story. Not just any story, but one that shows how well you can see into the heart of ideas." Mira held the folder with both hands. She could already perceive the shape of a great adventure, but also the weight of great responsibility. "I'll try," she said. "I don't want you to just try," Mr. Hale replied gently. "I want you to persist, even when the words begin to fight back." The Library of Living Texts was hidden beneath the main building, behind a door that most students never noticed. That evening, Mira followed the map in her folder until she reached a staircase that twisted down like a question mark. At the bottom stood an iron door engraved with lines of tiny letters. As she approached, the letters began to glow and rearrange themselves into a sentence. "State your hypothesis," the door demanded. Mira swallowed. "My hypothesis," she said slowly, "is that every story has a secret lesson, and if I can find it, I can learn how to tell better stories myself." The door clicked open. Inside, shelves rose like tall forests. Books whispered to each other, trading opinion and gossip in dozens of languages. A floating notebook drifted toward her. "Candidate Mira," it said in a crisp voice, "I am your guide. I will introduce each trial and keep a summary of your progress. You may call me Index." Index flapped open to a fresh page. On its first line, a neat heading appeared. Trial 1, Reading. "Before you create stories," Index said, "you must show that you can read them. Please walk to the Hall of Pages." As Mira walked, the shelves shifted around her like slow waves. She tried to scan the titles, but there were too many. Some she could easily skim. Others seemed to demand that she stop and scrutinise every line. "Don't worry about reading everything," Index advised. "For now, you must learn to choose wisely." The Hall of Pages was a wide room where loose sheets of paper flew in circles like huge white moths. Each page carried a paragraph from a different essay, thesis, or dissertation. Some looked like research papers filled with charts. Others were handwritten stories or scientific articles. A bell chimed. Words floated in the air, forming instructions. Read 3 texts. Find the main point of each. Explain the gist in your own words. Beware of the copy crows. Mira grabbed one flying page and began to skim it. Then another she chose to scrutinise more slowly. She tried to detect the structure of each text, to discern which sentences really mattered. The first page looked like part of a history essay. Mira underlined a sentence that seemed to summarise the whole paragraph. "So, the gist," she murmured, "is that small actions can cause big changes over time." Index nodded its paper body. "Good. You have begun to analyse." The second page came from a scientific thesis about rivers. Mira tried to infer the author's main point. "They assume," she said, that the river will always behave the same way, but they only studied it for 1 year. That seems like a weak hypothesis. Excellent, Index said. You not only found the point, but also questioned it. The third page was from a personal dissertation about fear. The language was poetic and strange. Mira had to read it 3 times before she felt she could comprehend it. I suppose the writer is saying that fear can imply love, she said slowly. We are only afraid to lose what we care about. A warm glow spread across the room. The flying pages paused and bowed like birds. Trial 1 completed, Index said. You can now move to the Chamber of Voices, where your own words will be tested. The Chamber of Voices looked like a small theatre. Empty chairs curved around a wooden stage. On the stage stood a podium and a single microphone. Here you must speak, Index explained. You will be given ideas from other people's writing. Your task is to cite them properly, not plagiarise them. You must never simply copy and print their words into your mind. Shadows appeared in the seats, wearing the shapes of famous authors and scientists. One shadow held up a scroll. Words glowed on it like fire. Mira could recognize a powerful quote about courage. Her first instinct was simply to recite it exactly. Wait, Index whispered. If you only recite, are you thinking? Or just acting like a machine that takes dictated orders? Mira stepped to the microphone. In her letter, she began, the writer says... She did not copy the sentence word for word. Instead, she described its gist, then added, I would cite this as a reminder that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act while afraid. The shadows nodded. Another scroll appeared, this time filled with data. Mira was asked to extract the main result and give an abstract. She looked carefully, trying to detect patterns and analyze the numbers. The data seemed to show, she started, then corrected herself. No, I should not assume. I will just say what I can honestly infer. When people feel supported, they learn faster. Again, the shadows nodded. You are speaking with your own mind, Index said softly. You refuse to plagiarize, and you know how to reference the thoughts of others. The council will be pleased. A final bell rang. The theatre dissolved into mist, and Mira found herself standing before another doorway carved with tiny symbols of brains and question marks. Beyond the door sat 12 chairs around a round table. In each chair shimmered a different figure. A scientist, a poet, a philosopher, an engineer, a doctor, and others Mira could not name. They were the Council of Ideas. We are here to test your thinking, said the philosopher, whose robe seemed woven from question marks, not just your memory. A scroll appeared before Mira. On it was written, Why do stories matter in a world of machines? The scientist leaned forward. First, give us your outline, he said. What are the main points you want to make? Mira closed her eyes, thinking. At the outset, I would say, stories help us understand ourselves, she replied. Then I would postulate that machines without stories might perceive facts but not meanings. Finally, I would speculate that stories can guide how we build and use technology. The poet smiled. Now choose one hypothesis and defend it, she said. We want to hear your opinion. I will defend the idea that stories help us stay fully human, Mira said. I reckon that without them, we would forget what we value. The doctor spoke next. We sometimes diagnose people's problems with long questionnaires, he said. If you had to diagnose society, what would you say? Mira hesitated. I would suppose we are often busy but lonely, she said. We compare ourselves to others all the time, but rarely stop to truly listen. The engineer tapped the table. Show us that you can think carefully. Do not jump from one idea to another. Be deliberate." Mira breathed slowly. She began to analyze her own thoughts out loud, explaining how she had moved from observation to hypothesis, from hypothesis to careful inference. She refused to assume more than the evidence allowed. The council listened, sometimes interrupting to ask sharp questions, sometimes asking her to clarify. She tried to stay conscious of her own biases, to discern where she might be wrong. At last, the philosopher raised a hand. "You are willing to doubt yourself," he said. "This is rare and valuable. You may proceed to the final trial." The final chamber was not filled with books or scrolls, but with mirrors. Some showed Mira as a child, some showed her future older and tired, some showed her standing on a stage, giving a brilliant presentation to a cheering crowd. "What is this place?" she whispered. "The room of mirrors shows you the stories you tell about yourself," Index replied. "Here you must compare what you perceive with what may actually be true. You must detect when your mind is unfair." One mirror showed Mira standing at her desk, late at night, staring at a blank page. Written across the glass were the words, "I am not smart enough." "Is that a fact?" Index asked. "Or just a cruel analogy your mind makes, like comparing a seed to a full-grown tree and deeming the seed a failure?" Mira felt tears rise. "I assume every good writer never struggles," she admitted. "Yet you know from reading their papers and dissertations that they struggled for years," Index said. "So what can you conclude?" Mira looked again. "I can conclude that struggling does not imply I am hopeless," she said. "It only implies I am learning." The words on the mirror faded. New ones appeared. "You will embarrass the school." She shook her head. "I cannot predict the future," she said slowly. "I can only persist, do my best, and let the results follow." The mirrors softened, their harsh reflections melting into gentle light. "You have faced your inner exam," Index said. "You may now craft your final story." Back in the underground auditorium, students from all over the school waited nervously. Each had taken their own journey through the library of living texts. Now it was time to share. When Mira's name was called, she walked onto the stage with Index floating beside her like a loyal pet notebook. She began her presentation with a short abstract. "Tonight," she said, "I will tell a story about a world where people let machines make every decision for them, until one child begins to question the script. My summary is simple. Stories are how we stay awake." She held up a small card where she had written an outline of her talk, each heading marking a step in her argument. She did not try to recite every line she had memorized. Instead, she spoke as if telling a secret to a close friend, sometimes using a short quote from a writer she admired, always careful to reference or cite them. She used a gentle analogy. "If data are the bricks of knowledge," she said, "then stories are the houses we build from them, the place where people can actually live." As she told her tale, the Council of Ideas sat in the front row, listening. They watched how she used evidence, how she moved from hypothesis to conclusion, how she refused to assume more than she could prove, yet dared to speculate about better futures. When she finished, there was a long, still silence. Then the philosopher stood. "We do not need to compare you to others," he said. "You are yourself, and that is enough." The scientist added, "You have shown that you can read, think, and speak with integrity. You never plagiarize, you give credit where it is due, and you treat your own mind with kindness." Mr. Hale, sitting at the back, felt his eyes sting. He had always reckoned that Mira had something special, but he had never wanted to dictate her path. Tonight, she had chosen it herself. "We therefore conclude," announced the council, "that Mira will represent Northbridge at the Global Story Lab." The auditorium erupted in applause, yet inside, Mira felt a quieter victory. She had not only passed an examination, she had learned how to listen when numbers, pages, and even her own doubts tried to speak. She had learned to read the world like a living text. As she left the stage, Index whispered, "This story is only the beginning." Mira smiled. "At the outset, I thought the exam was about grades," she said. "Now I comprehend that it was really about learning how to think." Years later, when Mira thought about that winter, she realized that every trial had been carefully designed to elicit her real way of thinking, not just polished answers. She remembered how she used to presume that clever people never doubted themselves, how her worries would insist that one mistake meant total failure. Now she could calmly deduce that doubt was simply a sign of caring, and that real learning began the moment she chose to question her own assumptions.